After the hour, America, Hugh Hewitt, joined now by United States Senator Tom Cotton from the great state of Arkansas, and his staff called me earlier. I'm not to bring up the University of Arkansas's football team. I don't know why. I don't know why that's been prohibited to me, Senator. Did something go wrong this weekend?
Oh, Hugh, it certainly was another disappointing weekend for my Razorbacks down in Dallas, but no more disappointing than I'm sure it was a weekend for you.
Well, the Browns had a bad weekend, but, not the Ohio State Buckeyes. Senator, I want to ask you about the almost certain next Speaker of the House gave a very robust speech about national defense today. And I hope he is a defense speaker. I want him to be a defense speaker. But Politico immediately wrote up that he wasn't specific about defense funding. And I know that there are, along with you and Lindsey Graham, a number of people in the Senate who are insisting upon a budget or a CR that amends the deep deficit we've dug in defense. Can you explain to the audience what the lines of conflict are over the defense budget right now and how it might be resolved?
Well, Hugh, first off, our defense budget is the one area in government where the strategy should drive the budget. The budget can't drive the strategy. And as we have seen in the last few days, as Russia floods into Syria with more fighter aircraft and surface-to-air missiles and tanks and armored personnel carriers, the strategic situation around the world is grave. At the same time, we are continuing to cut our budget through a mindless process called sequestration that was imposed 4 years ago, putting caps on the overall level of spending, both for defense and for domestic spending. I think that we need to lift those caps for our military. We need to substantially increase military spending by well over $100 billion. But we also need to recognize that we can't have the kind of long-term debts that we saw in the first years of the Obama administration, and that we're still almost $500 billion in greater debt every single year. So I opposed the continuing resolution last week, as I will oppose the continuing resolution today, specifically because it continues to underfund defense. And going forward, if we have any kind of budget deal that doesn't just increase spending for defense, which we all agree is absolutely necessary, but also increases pork barrel spending and other kind of wasteful projects, I don't think that that we should accept that either.
And so how does this play out? Because one thing I could see the Congress doing is agreeing that with this president, there isn't going to be any breakthrough on anything. Let's do a budget that will take us through the election of 2016 and then step back and come together with the new president. And if it funds defense, I can live with that. I really can. But I don't know if you can, and I don't know if there's political will to do that. Well,
the Democrats here are playing politics with national security, put simply, Hugh. They've now had 3, 4, maybe even 5 votes on the Senate floor where they have filibustered the defense spending bill. They've refused to even let us begin debate and have a vote on the merits on the defense spending bill until we capitulate to their demand for $1 of domestic spending increases for every $1 of defense spending increases. They're not even opposed to increasing defense spending. They recognize that the world is more dangerous today than it was 6.5 years ago when President Obama took office. Yet they're acting as if they didn't lose a historic landslide election last year. I mean, we just won this election. I think that we have the high ground here to say that if we're going to increase defense spending in any kind of budget deal, there's not going to be a one-for-one exchange and more domestic spending. Remember, domestic spending was raised to historically high levels by the stimulus in 2009, which applied virtually not at all to our security spending. So there may ultimately be a budget deal, but if it's a budget deal in which the Democrats hold out for $1 of domestic spending for every $1 of defense spending, I'm not sure I can accept that, and I'm not sure a majority of Republicans can either.
Now, Senator Cott, one of the things that most surprises or alarms me is I saw Deputy National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes on with Jake Tapper a couple hours ago. He seems utterly clueless about the significance of the Russian threat into Syria. And the future speaker today said maybe a no-fly zone is what we need, but I wonder whether we would enforce a no-fly zone against Russian jets if there are Russian pilots in them. Do they have an idea of what's happening? This is a reversal of 40 years of American preeminence in the Middle East, and it's happening in 4 months.
Yeah, Hugh, every news story about the administration response to Putin's moves in Syria say that they're confused or perplexed or uncertain about his intentions. Let me lay it out very clearly for President Obama and his advisors, as well as your listeners. Russia is an enemy. Vladimir Putin is a former KGB spy. They are in Syria to prop up their tyrannical ally, Bashar al-Assad, to increase the leverage they have on any final negotiated outcome, to continue to undermine American power and prestige in the Middle East, to distract away from their ongoing war in Ukraine and to divide the European Union by driving even more refugees onto Europe's shores. That's Putin's intentions. It's very simple. And we, through inaction as a country, have invited Vladimir Putin and Russia back into the Middle East. It's not just so bad that our adversaries, like Qasem Soleimani, the commanding general of Iran's shock forces, goes to Moscow to cooperate with Vladimir Putin. Last week, one of our strongest allies in the world, Benjamin Netanyahu, had to go to Moscow to talk about what Russian presence near Israel's border means for Israeli security. This may end up being one of the most dangerous legacies of the president's failed foreign policy, is that Russia is becoming a power broker in the Middle East for the first time in 45 years.
Well, I agree. That seems so obvious to me, but it does not seem. And in an off-the-record conversation with a former senior American leader, it was said that the people running the National Security Council, and I looked at young Mr. Rhodes today, are amateurish, sophomoric, and without any ability in this area. Is there anything to counter that? I don't know who's actually. I know Ash Carter's got the respect of a lot of people, but I don't know who is running the president's national security team.
Hugh, it's primarily lays at the feet of the president. He's the commander-in-chief. He's the one who is elected to keep this country safe and protect U.S. interests abroad. And from the very beginning, he has made it clear that he wants nothing to do with Syria, a country that sits on the border of key U.S. allies and sits at the crossroads of civilization. And the fact that we have remained inactive in Syria and that the president erased his own red line and humiliated American power and prestige in the region 2 years ago has set the condition for countries like Iran and Russia to flood into the zone in Syria and be able to control the terms of any final outcome there.
In your travels, have you heard from our allies that they're willing to try and match and reject Russian influence in places beyond Syria if we'll back them up? Is there a desire for us to re-enter into this?
Yeah, Hugh, around the globe, there's a desire for more U.S. leadership. I was in East Asia just last month, and they want more U.S. involvement and engagement to counteract not just Russia up on the northern or northeast part of the Western Pacific, but obviously China in the eastern and southeastern region. Throughout the Middle East, none of these countries want to turn back to Russia. I mean, Russia hasn't been a major player in the Middle East for 40 years. But if the United States is going to leave a vacuum and Russia is going to rush in to fill the vacuum, they have to deal with the power dynamics as they see it. And then finally, of course, in Eastern Europe, our allies, our NATO allies like Estonia and Latvia are increasingly concerned that what they saw in Crimea or in eastern Ukraine could happen on their territory. And that would be truly catastrophic because it would either mean a Russia-NATO war or it would mean the end of NATO as we know it.
Senator Tom Cotton, thank you. Alarming but necessary. I'm glad to have you make the points. Thank you.